Welcome to Education Today. I'm John Zish from the Armstrong School District. Tonight we're going to celebrate a very special graduate, Lieutenant Charles T. Hutchison. He was a 1960 Katanning High School graduate who led the varsity basketball team to a section championship. Charles Hutchison went on to West Point Military Academy and later paid the ultimate sacrifice serving the Dominican Republic in 1965. In November 2009, the Armstrong School District Board of Directors approved renaming the Katanning High School Gymnasium after Lieutenant Charles T. Hutchison, and a major celebration was held Friday, February 5th to rename the gym in conjunction with the 2010 basketball team's senior night. To talk more about this amazing individual, we have some very special guests with us tonight. Vicki Hutchison Niederkorn, who is Lieutenant Hutchison's sister and is from Hawaii, David Streckengost of Atlanta, Georgia, and John Helgren and Joe Atwood of Katanning, who each played guard on Lieutenant Hutchison's basketball team in 1960, and Dr. Shaner of Katanning, a friend of Lieutenant Hutchison's and fellow 1960 graduates. Welcome everyone to Education Today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Our guests are in for a real treat tonight as we celebrate this amazing individual. 50 years ago, Lieutenant Hutchison graduated from high school. Of course, he was called Hutch then, if I'm not mistaken. And he had an amazing senior year, both on and off the basketball courts. I'd like it if each of you would please take a minute and share some of your recollections about that very special senior year from your perspective. What was life like for Charles Hutchison? What were some of the highlights?
Well, life for Charles Hutchison was pretty much life for all of us. It was a fun time, the 50s, the 60s, just growing up in that time period. We really, going into that year basketball-wise, I don't think anybody in the community thought that there was going to be the results that we came up with. But it just started to mushroom, and it became a very, very fun year. And for Charlie, that meant a lot more fun than most of us. Okay.
Yeah, Hutch was he was a fun sort of guy, and basketball was very important in his life, but just his friendships and going to school and being involved with his family, that was equally as much fun. And he was a person that had a lot of fun, a lot of time. Wouldn't you say, John?
I would say. All the time, yeah. And Hutch, like any young teenager at the time, ran the gamut of emotions. But one thing about him, when he was playing basketball, he was as focused as anybody could ever be on the outcome of the game and having a good game. He's a tremendous basketball player. And that just carried over to the rest of the team, I think, too, because we looked at him as the leader. Right, Joe?
Yes, he was the leader. He was the leading scorer in the state that year, as a matter of fact. And it was just fun playing with him. He was a good guy to play with.
We saw last night, we were talking about a lot of the things that he was involved in, and he was a prankster. He was a person that enjoyed people, but the other thing that he enjoyed so much, in addition to his basketball, was his family, Vicki and his mother and dad, and they had a camp at East Brady up at Brady's Bend on the river, and we all grew up on that camp, learning to water ski up there, and that was the other place that he really enjoyed himself. So if he wasn't playing basketball here in Katanning, he was water skiing in East Brady. That was just a way of life at that time.
And from my perspective, being 6 years younger, it meant a red and white station wagon, a full load of young teenagers, and my dad driving to the basketball game.
Probably all over the region.
Yep, and we were in love with every one of them.
Oh,
Oh, Vicki.
Every one of them.
well, thank you for that great introduction. Let's zero in on that amazing basketball season in 1960. What are your all of you are welcome to join in on this, but I would especially like to hear from some of his teammates who played with him. What was it like to play basketball with Hutch, and what made him so dominant of a player?
Well, Charlie was 6'4". He was the center on the team, and we played basketball all summer. Every night we were playing on somebody's basketball court behind in an alley somewhere,
And he was a big man at that time.
Very big. Yeah.
6'4" was a big man, not like the 7-footers today, but
No, and
But that
6'4"
was
at that time, and being able to shoot from the outside most of the time the kids that were 6'4" were the ones that you'd plant underneath the basket and just say, stand there and get a rebound.
Huh.
Charlie had a lot of shooting range. I mean, he would be, in today's college ball, he could very easily be the three-point shooter. I mean, he was that skilled from outside.
Wow.
And it was a funny year because we were all alley kids. I mean, that's where we grew up. We grew up in the alleys, and we played there. And I laugh because our 7th grade year we won 1 game. Our 8th grade year we won 2. 9th grade 3. 10th grade 4. Junior year 5. All right, and then our senior year we won the section. All right?
Wow.
And there was a lot of combinations there. Charlie was the youngest player on the team. You know, whenever he was the youngest kid in our class. His birthday, didn't you say January 25th. He could very easily have been a junior that year.
Huh.
All right, most kids probably would have been juniors that year. But he, his parents enrolled him in school at, whenever he could go to school, and so he became a very young senior. My birthday was November, so I was a young senior. And we just sort of matured into what we matured into by working and working. We finally got there. But then we also added in some elements. Terry Thompson came on, Joe came on mid-season, Bill Emminger came in, and we had a cohesive group. But the deal was, when you played with Charlie, you knew where the scoring was coming from. All right, because we all, that's where it was. I mean, and I think that the first time we really realized that was we played Vandergrift, and all of a sudden these kids that had never won before scored 98 points in a game, and Charlie had 43.
Wow.
And then we understood what our roles were after that. And
an offensive weapon, huh?
He was an offensive weapon.
He had
There was
542 points that season.
Yeah,
wow.
Season
Yeah.
games,
Was the leading scorer in Pennsylvania that year?
Yeah, and it's
Wow.
it was, everybody played their role, and Charlie was very, he was very, I don't want to use the word grateful, but he was very comfortable in his role as the scoring leader on the team, and he accepted that, and he knew that we depended upon it, and he did it. That was the thing. Probably the other turning point was the Ford City game.
The first one?
Yeah, the first Ford City game.
You can speak to that, John.
Well, Shrek was more intimately involved in it than I was. I was on the bench most of the time. But yeah, Dave hit it right on the head in terms of the team and how it came together that year. And Ford City was a natural rival. I know in recent past they haven't been that dominant in basketball, but for years and years, Ford City was a powerhouse in the state. Just every year they won the section, went to the state finals at least a couple times, I think, and had a legendary coach down there by the name of Hugh Rupert. Well, for us to beat them, like Dave said, I think that signaled the turning point in that whole senior season. And that was a close game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it ended up 54-53, and Charlie made a basket right towards the end. I mean, it was if I remember correctly, it was a scramble in the key, and he came up with the ball and scored with like 2-3 seconds to go in the game. And I know sometimes memory can embellish things, but I do think that's the scenario that happened, and I do remember the score was 54-53.
Wow.
And
Second game, different story.
yeah, second game we blew them out, and that was just the indication of how the team progressed throughout that year, and the confidence level that we got as the year went on. And if you look back through the yearbooks of the 1950s and late 1940s, scores for the Katanning Ford City game were generally something like 78-31 Ford City, and whenever we beat them that first year, and the whole community came alive. I mean, we started getting crowds at the games, and the people that came to the games were happy. They were, just rocking in the stands. So it was a whole different experience for Katanning basketball. It was a great time to be a kid. Great time.
Well, and the thing about Charlie, I think, was that, he was really, like we'd said, he was just an enjoyable person, but he was really very modest. He didn't take on that persona of a star basketball player. He just was a very modest sort of guy. He enjoyed the limelight that he was getting, but he didn't dwell on it or make that a focus in his day. And this town at that time was a town that was very much alive. The economy and everything was great, and you would go downtown, and if you went to you know, we all used to go to the barber shop downtown where they had 5 or 6 pool tables, and everybody would go there on Saturdays, get a haircut, play pool, and you know, you'd go in, and Charlie was the focus of attention of all the older guys in town that were there. But he just kind of accepted that as a role that he was playing at the time. But he was very modest about it. You know, he'd still be back there with his friends shooting pool the way all of us were doing. And like Dave said, it was a great time in this town. I mean, the people they really enjoyed that whole season.
Right.
Charlie, you know, Charlie wasn't a natural player either.
Yeah.
Okay, he really wasn't. He was gangly, you know, grew fast, young kid, that sort of thing. And I don't know, Vicki, whether his dad did it or you got some of the prisoners. His dad was the sheriff of Armstrong County for a lot of years. And but a basket went up in the driveway behind the courthouse.
That might have been for the prisoners.
Is that right? It could have been the prisoners built that one, huh? And anyhow, that's where Charlie started to hone his shooting ability, okay, back there in that driveway.
About how old was he when he took it seriously and started to practice?
Seriously?
Do you remember that?
I don't ever remember him not having a basketball. We have a picture of he was probably about 6 with my mom dribbling the basketball. So I just don't remember him not having one in his hand.
Yeah. So, and then, you know, it progressed there from behind Bauer Funeral Home down to Boulder Park in Ford City, and just playing ball all the time. That's all. And that's what it was about at that time.
Used to pick John up every day.
Yeah.
You know.
About 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning in the summertime when we were out of school, the Hutchmobile, as we call it, the old station wagon, would be out there and the horn would blow and Mom would say, "Hutch is out there." "Okay, see him, Mom." We'd be gone all day. We'd play in the morning, we'd play in the afternoon, and then at night we'd get on and play in Boulder Park.
Wow.
And Hutch was really driven at that point. Now that was his junior year, when I think he sensed personally, you know, I can do this. You know? And he drug a lot of us along with him. You know?
He was the best pure shooter I've ever seen in my life. He could shoot like the Ford City game. I had the ball at the foul line with about 5 or 6 seconds left. Hutch was behind me. And I turned around and threw the ball back to him. And he took the shot right at the buzzer, and we won by 1 point.
Wow.
Yeah, really. And that was, I think Dave mentioned it earlier, that was unique in that time period because most of the big centers were just big, tough, and rough football players that could rebound well and shoot layups maybe. But if Hutch got somebody that was taller than him, he'd just dribble to the outside a couple steps and hit it 25-foot jumps up, think nothing of it, you know. So he was unstoppable from that standpoint. He couldn't match up with him. And if they put anybody smaller on him, then he'd just shoot over the top of them. So.
Yeah, well, he was, and also at that time period, a lot of Katanning kids played 3 sports. You know, they'd play football, and then as soon as the football season was over, they'd try basketball or wrestling, and then as soon as that season was over, they'd play baseball. You know, and that's just if you played one sport, lots of times you played at least 2. He didn't do that. He played one sport. That was his sport. And so whereas he, you know, he worked pretty much year round on it, and that was what I think helped the gangliness and the height situation in the youth. So.
That hard work, I understand, is still inspiring students today, 50 years later, our Katanning High School basketball players and across the district. But that's why the renaming of the Katanning High School gym is so special to today's seniors. But now, going back into Charlie's life, what happened after high school? What was his next step?
Vicki, do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to?
Well, he actually missed his graduation because he was accepted to West Point, but he had to up his grades a little bit and get because basketball was #1. So we went to prep school first for a month or so, I believe.
I never knew that. I'll be darned.
He had to get tuned up for West Point.
Is that right?
And then West Point was after that. Yeah.
So you went to West Point, U.S. Military Academy.
Right.
Okay.
And what you said there is true. You know, what is nice about this, and I know this has been very special for Vicki, is that after all these years, there are still people in this community and in this area that still remember Charlie, remember him for the person he was, for what he did in basketball, for being a West Pointer, for giving his life in service of his country. And, you know, a lot of this came about what has occurred now because of Bill Henry, who's the varsity coach at Katanning. And when Bill became the varsity coach 2 years ago or so, he contacted me and he wanted to know all the stories about Charlie because he remembered him whenever he was a little kid and that basketball years. And excuse me, he wanted to use Hutch as an example to his players, as an example of dedication and commitment and so on. And so, you know, Bill really got the ball rolling on a lot of these things because it was something that he wanted to use with his basketball team. And so he brought that back up. And when I'd mention that to Vicki, she'd say, you know, what makes her feel good about it, and I'm speaking for her now, she can for herself, but she said is that people still remember and still care after 50 years, you know, because when the time goes by, things begin to fade. And but he's still an example, and Bill Henry still uses him as an example with his ball players every year. And
I talked to Bill at the graveside ceremony we went to, you know, in the spring, and he said that his team, his coach on his team, whenever he was going through, and I believe wasn't his team whenever he was a high school kid, didn't they win?
Yeah,
They won the section
1970.
championship.
20
He
years
said
later, they won
that
another
his
section.
coach continually brought up Charlie Hutchison and the 1960 team to them, and you know, you can do this, that sort of thing. That's nice from a perspective of an old fogey like me, that somebody is remembering the team that is go through, and I'm sure Vicki finds that's very comforting that somebody remembers her brother that way. So
I can't imagine what a dream season it was for the school and the community and for all of you.
it was a ride.
But then he went to West Point Military Academy.
yeah, he
Surprise you?
yeah, actually that surprised us all that he went to West Point. I think, you know, he was, like as we said, you know, he was a person that enjoyed a good time. He made he had a lot of scholarship offers and a lot of people that had made overtures towards him. He made some trips to some of the universities.
I think it was about 30.
Yeah,
right?
about 30 scholarship offers, and he made trips to some of the universities, and then in the end he decided on the military academy, and we all just kind of looked at each other and thought, this isn't going to work because, you know, he was, with the exception of basketball, he was not the most disciplined person. I mean, he didn't want, you know, he didn't fit that role, and his first years at West Point, you know, I'd be in touch with him a lot, and some of those years were kind of tough. I mean, you know, he had to fall into that routine that you do whenever you're a West Point cadet, and he didn't always fall into those roles very well, and he had to do a lot of marching on the grounds to, yeah.
We went to visit him first Christmas because of the first year they were not allowed to leave the campus. The first year they're called plebes. We didn't even see him because he was being disciplined and marching up and down.
You came to visit him, but you couldn't see him.
We could see him, but he was marching.
Oh.
And those years at West Point, you know, they were even more stringent than they are now. And I remember him, I talked to him on the phone at Christmas time, and he was telling me, the first Christmas you weren't allowed to come home. You know, you went there your plebe year, you stayed the whole year, you never had any leave. And I talked to him on the phone at Christmas, and he said, you know, what kind of a place is this? He said, it's bad enough, he said, that we don't get to come home at Christmas, but he said, every night at the dinner table, the upperclassmen make us sing "There's No Place Like Home" for the holidays. You know, he said they always had to stand and sing for the whole Christmas week, you know. And then so, you know, but after 2 years, then I think he began to really see the possibilities of what West Point had to offer, and he really started to fall in line as to what his aspirations were of becoming an officer and a leader in the Army, and you know, he just kind of fell in. And at that time, Tom Kearns, who played on the Altoona team that played against the 1960 team, was also at West Point, and at that time he and Tom Kearns became roommates for the last 2 years at West Point, and they just really supported each other in making that their goal to become good officers and graduates of West Point. So then he really started to fit the mold and look the part and act the part, you know, more so.
Wow.
Well, he just took his leadership abilities to a different area. Just
Yeah.
like he was the leader in scoring and, you know, on the team and that sort of thing. He then, and as evidenced by what happened in Santo Domingo, he took on the role of a leader there, and And so you can just, it was just in a different field, that's all.
And at West Point, he played basketball at West Point, and he did very well. His plebe year, I saw recently in one of the things I was reading, I think he averaged around 12 or 16 points a game in his plebe year on the plebe team, and then moved up to the varsity in his sophomore year or second year. So he's still, basketball was still very important. And then even after he graduated from West Point and was down at Fort Bragg in Ranger training, he played basketball down there as well, you know, Army basketball. So that still became a focal point. But
I was just going to ask, what did he do after graduating from West Point in 1964, and how did he become Lieutenant Hutchinson?
Well,
Bought a Corvette
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. He got a
Yeah.
Corvette.
Ah,
and had the best month of his life when he came home for that 30 days, and
Yeah.
probably everybody here
yeah.
up at East Brady. That was a wonderful
Oh, yeah.
Summer of '64. Right?
summer.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
summer of
summer of
'64.
Yeah, he, at that time at West Point, or any of the service schools, they paid the cadets $111.11 a month. But they had nothing to spend their money on because they weren't allowed to go anywhere. So they just used to save their money, and at graduation, the car dealers came into the academy, and these guys would all order new cars, and because they had the money for it. And a new Corvette back then was what, $2,700 or something, John? And he had the money, so, you know, like a lot of the other graduates, he ordered a new Corvette. And then at graduation, these car dealers would deliver all these Corvettes to West Point, you know, and turn them all over to the graduates. And Hutch bought a silver Corvette Roadster '64, and he loved that car, boy, I'll tell you.
wow.
And he drove it like he loved it.
Well, and at that time, I don't know whether the military academies are the same, but at that time, I believe you had to have a 5-year obligation to the military. Whenever you came out, you graduated as a second lieutenant, I believe.
Yeah.
And whenever that happens, then you go through your training and you start your 5 years. That was the payback for getting a free education for 4 years, and so that's where he went. That was the direction that was dictated by, you know, just going to West Point in the first place.
Sure.
And so
Yeah, and you know, the thing that I think that a lot of people don't understand, or, you know, you don't associate with it at the time. I know we didn't as kids, but, you know, these people go to these service academies, and they put in their 4 years and they get the free education, that's right, but upon graduation, they're commissioned, as Dave said, an officer, and then, I mean, they go to work at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that class of 1964, one of the classmates of Colonel John Murray wrote a book called The Fallen Warriors, and he had taken all of the classmates that they had at that time who died in battle and wrote a book about them. And at the time that John had written the book, there were 30 some of the classmates of Charlie's died in combat. You know, Charlie was the first one to die in combat, and then there were a couple of others in other obscure kind of places, but the majority of those fellows all died in Vietnam. You know, Vietnam was very big and in full scale at that time. So when you graduated from West Point in 1964, you were going to get at least 2, if not 3 tours in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And all of his classmates did. I mean, they all did, and many of them died in combat. So, you know, it was kind of an idyllic situation. You know, I mean, all of the things that went on at West Point and that were history driven, you know, the same things would occur at West Point over all the years, even today. But all of a sudden you graduate and then you become a soldier, you know, and you're expected to serve, and these guys all do. And women today, you know, I mean, they go out and they serve, and they're in harm's way a lot of times. And so whenever Charlie graduated, he and Tom Kearns decided that they would go with the infantry, and they would go with the 82nd Airborne, and they wanted to go to Ranger training. So that's where they sent him, was down to Fort Bragg, and he earned his Ranger's badge, and he also earned his parachute wings, And then, and he was also taking some night courses in law at the time whenever he got shipped to the Dominican Republic. So.
I'd like to say how he chose Rangers.
Yes.
Do you know that story?
Yeah, go ahead.
He and Tom they only had like 3 or 4 hours to make a decision. They hadn't made a decision which part of the Army they were going to go into. And the way I heard it was Charlie said, well, I hear the girls in North Carolina are pretty nice. That's how they chose Rangers.
So he continued his education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Huh.
It sounds like him.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Does anyone here know about the U.S. military involvement in the Dominican Republic in 1965? I'm sure a lot of our viewers don't know much about that. So,
Well,
why did we send forces there, and how did Lieutenant Hutchinson get involved in that?
That was, if you're, history people will take you back to the place where, that was a couple years after the Bay of Pigs, which was the Cuban problem with Fidel Castro. The Caribbean was a very somewhat turbulent, questionable area at that time. Cuba was 90 miles off the shore of the United States. The Soviet Union at that time period was a very big power, and it was the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the United States government was very conscious of any attempts on the part of the leader of the Soviet Union, who was Nikita Khrushchev, of getting into that area with any type of weaponry, rebel uprisings, or anything such as that. And so Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, was a rebel insurrection where you had rebels that were threatening the government of the Dominican Republic. And as small as that island would be, it's a great place to put missiles, you know, that close to the United States. Cuba was already communistic, and so, you know, you didn't want it to just keep on going. And so and we've done the same thing with many smaller nations like that, where we've taken troops down to sort of quell the uprising, okay? And so we basically sent a small task force down there to do that, and that was the reason why they were there. And it really, to this day, Dominican Republic is still a staunch supporter of the United States. It's an anti-communist nation. And so the effort down there was successful. It just was costly to us.
Right.
Okay, personally.
Yes.
That was but that was the background on the Dominican Republic at that time.
So Lieutenant Hutchinson was a platoon leader, and he went with the Rangers there to help in that effort and
John,
peacekeeping
you want
effort.
to tell the story?
Yeah, he was, Tom Kearns, again, who was his roommate, was also in the Dominican Republic at the time, but he was in another area. But Charlie's commanding officer had shared with Tom what had actually occurred, and what had occurred was there was a machine gun placement in a upper portico on a building, and where the rebels had cut off everybody in this particular area because they had a machine gun placed there, and they needed a group to go in and take out that machine gun, and Charlie volunteered along with his platoon to go and do that. And Tom Kearns was talking to us about us and telling us it was just really like fighting door to door, going down the streets, you know, from doorway to doorway to trying to approach where the machine gun area was. And in going out around, one of Charlie's men was wounded and down in the street, and Charlie went out and saved that man, but in the process he received fatal injuries at the time. So, but the platoon did take the machine gun placement, and they did move ahead, but he gave his life doing that. But just like Hutch was, you know, it's not surprising to any of us that he gave his life in saving someone else.